The room was dark, heavy drapes blocking out any hint of the outside world. The air hung thick and still, smelling faintly of disinfectant and stale human breath. In the center, almost swallowed by a worn armchair, sat Howard Hughes. His hair, once impeccably groomed, now cascaded past his shoulders, a tangled mess of grey and white. His fingernails, shockingly long and yellowed, curved like talons. Around him, towering stacks of Kleenex boxes formed a bizarre, makeshift fortress. He clutched a single green pea between two fingers, turning it slowly, his eyes, barely visible behind matted brows, fixed on it with an intense, almost fearful concentration. He saw contamination everywhere, in everything, even in this small, innocent vegetable. A faint, tinny voice emanated from a distant television, its screen a dim rectangle of light against the oppressive darkness. A news anchor, oblivious to the man in the chair, discussed the enigmatic billionaire, his vast fortune, and his increasingly bizarre reclusiveness. The world wondered about him, speculated, but understood nothing of the silent battle he fought. A hushed voice, belonging to an aide, standing just beyond the visible light, broke the silence. "Mr. Hughes, the board needs your sign-off on the petrochemical deal. It's a $300 million acquisition." The words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the empire still awaiting his command, even as its emperor was lost in his own mind. Hughes responded with a low, guttural sound, a sort of dismissive grunt that was barely intelligible. He gestured vaguely towards the pea, then waved a hand, a clear sign of disinterest, of a mind consumed by more immediate, more terrifying threats. The petrochemical deal, a fortune to anyone else, was nothing compared to the imagined dangers lurking on a single green pea. The news report on the television shifted, flashing an old black-and-white image. It was a crumbling movie set, a ghost town of false fronts and faded glory, or perhaps a grounded, unfinished aircraft prototype abandoned in a dusty hangar. It was a stark visual of an unfulfilled legacy, of a vast potential now left to rot. The image flickered, then vanished, replaced by another talking head. The man who once conquered the skies now feared the dust on his own hands. The only sound left was the faint, almost rhythmic rustle of Kleenex, as Hughes meticulously wiped his fingers. Then the pea, then his fingers again. What truly happened to the man who had everything? What dark forces had consumed the brilliant mind that once reshaped industries and defied gravity? Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Howard Hughes, however, wasn't born into this twilight of his life. His story began far from darkened rooms and paranoid whispers, in the bustling, oil-rich landscape of early 20th century Houston, Texas. It was a time of immense opportunity and raw ambition, where fortunes were made and lost overnight, fueled by the black gold gushing from the earth. The city itself was a testament to the era's boundless energy, a place where innovation and enterprise were celebrated. His father, Howard R. Hughes Sr., was a towering figure in this world. A brilliant inventor, he revolutionized the oil drilling industry with his rotary drill bit, a device that allowed for faster and more efficient extraction, cementing the family's place among the new industrial elite. He was a man of science and business, driven and uncompromising. His mother, Aline Gano Hughes, came from a prominent Texas family. She was cultured and refined, but also intensely protective, almost to a fault. As an only child, young Howard was the sole focus of their attention, especially his mother's. He grew up surrounded by the trappings of immense wealth, sprawling estates, household staff, and a life of privilege that few could imagine. Yet, despite the affluence, Howard's childhood was marked by a unique kind of isolation. His mother's overprotectiveness, fueled by a fear of childhood diseases, created a sterile environment around him. She instilled in him an extreme fear of germs, meticulously cleaning everything he touched, inspecting his food, and limiting his interactions with other children. This constant emphasis on sanitation, while perhaps born of love, inadvertently laid the groundwork for the crippling germophobia that would plague him later in life. He was doted upon, yes, but also burdened by the unspoken weight of his parents' high expectations. The strict social norms of upper-class Texan society further reinforced a sense of duty and achievement. Appearances mattered, and Howard was expected to embody the family's success. Even at a young age, Howard showed flashes of his extraordinary intellect. He exhibited a natural mechanical genius, dismantling and reassembling complex machines with an intuitive understanding that baffled adults. He built radios from scratch and even designed a motorized bicycle. This early entrepreneurial spirit, coupled with his innate curiosity, hinted at the titan he would become. However, these early years also revealed the nascent anxieties that would eventually consume him. The germophobia, carefully nurtured by his mother, became an ingrained part of his psyche. Then tragedy struck, not once, but twice. His mother, Aline, died when Howard was just 18. Her death left a profound void, severing his closest emotional tie and removing the constant, albeit smothering presence that defined much of his early life. Less than 2 years later, his father also passed away suddenly. At 19, Howard Hughes found himself an orphan, inheriting an immense fortune and control of the Hughes Tool Company. This sudden double loss left him with not only a deep sense of grief and abandonment, but also an overwhelming burden of responsibility. He was now a very young man, navigating a vast empire, completely alone. This period marked the subtle beginnings of his rebellious streak. While deeply shaped by the expectations of his upbringing, the sudden freedom, coupled with his vast resources, allowed him to start forging his own path, often in defiance of societal norms. He would move beyond Houston, beyond the oil fields, seeking to leave his indelible mark on the world, driven by a complex mix of ambition, genius, and the silent anxieties that had taken root in his carefully sanitized childhood. With his inheritance firmly in hand, Howard didn't waste time. He plunged into business with a fierce intensity, showing a ruthless ambition that belied his youth. He aggressively acquired tool companies, expanding his father's legacy, but his methods were singular. He rarely delegated, micromanaging every detail, and trusted few outside his immediate circle. This early trait, an inability to truly let go of control, would become a defining characteristic, both a strength and a profound weakness. He was brilliant, no doubt, but also a difficult boss, demanding perfection and often alienating those around him with his unwavering focus and lack of patience for anything less than his own exacting standards. But the oil industry, while profitable, wasn't enough to contain his restless spirit. Howard set his sights on a new frontier, Hollywood. He arrived in Los Angeles, a young millionaire with an insatiable desire to make his mark. His initial foray into filmmaking was a spectacle of perfectionism. He poured money into projects, demanding reshoots, re-edits, and often clashing violently with seasoned directors, producers, and actors. Films like Hell's Angels became legendary not just for their aerial sequences, but for Hughes's obsessive pursuit of realism, often at astronomical costs and significant delays. He would reshoot entire films if a single scene didn't meet his vision, leading to massive budget overruns and the frustration of everyone involved. Colleagues found him brilliant yet maddening, a creative force who was simultaneously a dictator. He wanted things his way, always, and had the money to enforce it. Yet even Hollywood felt too small. His true passion lay in the skies. Aviation became his obsession, a realm where he could truly push boundaries. He pursued groundbreaking aircraft designs, driven by an almost childlike wonder combined with an adult's relentless determination. He designed, built, and flew his own planes, pushing the limits of speed and endurance. The H-1 Racer, a sleek silver bullet, shattered speed records, cementing his reputation as a visionary aviator. But this ambition was fueled by more than just a love for flight. It was also an obsessive need for control. He disregarded safety protocols in testing, often flying experimental planes himself, putting his own life at risk. These daring feats cemented his public image as a fearless pioneer, but privately they were more evidence of a man who felt he could bend reality to his will, a man who saw himself as invincible. His personal life, amidst this whirlwind of business and aviation, was equally tumultuous. He was a notorious playboy, linked to a string of Hollywood's most glamorous stars: Katharine Hepburn, Bette Davis, Ava Gardner, and many others. These romances were intense, fleeting, and often tragic for the women involved. Howard was possessive, controlling, and emotionally distant. He showered them with gifts and attention, then just as quickly withdrew, leaving behind a trail of broken promises and public humiliations. He demanded loyalty and total devotion, yet offered little in return, revealing a deep-seated insecurity and an inability to form lasting, healthy connections. He seemed to crave intimacy, but pushed it away the moment it threatened his absolute control. Each episode, from the occasional business failure to the inevitable breakdown of his relationships and the dangerous aviation stunts, incrementally chipped away at his mental stability. The initial anxieties, the seeds planted in his childhood, found fertile ground in the high-stakes world he inhabited. The pressure he put on himself, the constant striving for perfection, the lack of genuine human connection, all these factors created a slow, painful descent. The isolation that would later define him wasn't a sudden event. It was a gradual accumulation of choices, traumas, and the quiet erosion of his inner world. The man who once seemed to have everything, who conquered industries and charmed movie stars, was slowly, almost imperceptibly, building the walls that would eventually imprison him. The walls Hughes had been building around himself began to solidify, transforming from psychological barriers into physical ones. His eccentricities, once viewed as quirky traits of a genius, now started to significantly interfere with his public and private life, leading to an increasing and alarming isolation. His germophobia, a shadow that had always followed him, intensified dramatically. It was no longer just about cleanliness. It became an elaborate ritual, a carefully constructed defense against an unseen enemy. He demanded specific types of soap, surgical masks, and precise handling instructions for his staff, even for the most mundane interactions. A simple handshake became an intricate dance of avoidance and sanitization. The world outside his immediate bubble was viewed as contaminated, a threat to his very existence. This intensifying paranoia didn't just affect his personal habits. It bleeding into his business dealings. His vast empire, once a source of immense pride and relentless focus, began to suffer from his growing detachment. He would make erratic decisions, or worse, disappear for long periods, leaving his executives scrambling to manage his holdings. This caused immense financial and logistical chaos. One of the most telling examples of this period was the Spruce Goose project. Officially known as the H-4 Hercules, this massive flying boat was a monumental feat of engineering, a symbol of his grand ambition to build the largest aircraft ever. Yet it also became a symbol of his growing inability to manage reality. The project dragged on for years, consuming vast amounts of money and resources, often in secret, amidst public ridicule and increasing scrutiny. When it finally made its single, brief flight in 1947, it was less a triumph and more a testament to a genius battling his own demons. The public and even Congress, which held hearings on the project's funding, saw it as an expensive folly, a symptom of Hughes's increasingly erratic behavior. The media, always fascinated by his larger-than-life persona, now zeroed in on his reclusiveness. The whispers and judgments from former colleagues, friends, and the general public grew louder. The man who had once been hailed as a visionary, a daring aviator, and a Hollywood titan was now increasingly seen as a genius gone mad. His public image shifted from eccentric innovator to isolated recluse, a cautionary tale playing out in real time. His living spaces reflected this psychological shift. Hotel suites, once temporary havens, became sterile cocoons. Windows were blacked out, often permanently, to control light and maintain privacy. Temperatures were kept at precise, unvarying levels, regardless of the season. Air conditioning units hummed constantly, filtering out what he perceived as contaminants. These meticulously controlled environments, designed to protect him, paradoxically became his prison. The sense of suffocation and artificiality within these self-imposed havens only reinforced his deteriorating psychological state, pushing him further away from reality. Howard Hughes was, by this point, demonstrably on the verge of a complete breakdown. His once razor-sharp intellect, capable of grasping complex engineering principles and intricate business strategies, was now increasingly clouded by paranoia, fear, and obsessive compulsions. He struggled to maintain any semblance of normal functioning, his days consumed by rituals and anxieties. The world watched, fascinated and horrified, as one of its most brilliant minds teetered on the brink, his once vibrant life fading into the shadows of his own making. The stage was set for the final, tragic act of his complete withdrawal. The pivotal moment that sealed Howard Hughes's fate, pushing him into a complete and irreversible withdrawal from the world, occurred in the summer of 1946. He was test piloting the XF-11, a reconnaissance plane he had personally designed, a marvel of engineering intended for military use. During the flight, one of the contra-rotating propellers malfunctioned, sending the aircraft spiraling downward. Hughes, known for his daring and often reckless approach to aviation, tried desperately to save it, but the plane crashed violently into Beverly Hills. The impact was horrific. Hughes was pulled from the wreckage barely alive. His injuries were catastrophic: a collapsed lung, a crushed chest, multiple broken ribs, a fractured collarbone, and severe burns across his body. He was in excruciating pain, and the medical team, trying to save his life, administered massive doses of painkillers. This was the critical turning point. The accident, and his subsequent reliance on strong narcotics, particularly codeine, didn't just alleviate his physical suffering. It ignited a firestorm within his already fragile mind. His existing anxieties, his deep-seated germophobia, and his obsessive tendencies, which had been slowly escalating over years, now transformed into full-blown addiction and severe paranoia. The physical pain, combined with the mental fog induced by the powerful drugs, created a perfect storm. The line between reality and his fears blurred completely. He became convinced that the world outside was not just threatening, but actively hostile, a source of contamination and danger that he could no longer tolerate. Following a long and agonizing recovery, Hughes made a conscious, albeit tragic, decision. He would retreat entirely from public life. This wasn't merely a desire for privacy. It was a desperate attempt to create a controlled environment, a sterile bubble where he could be safe from the perceived threats of the outside world. He saw himself as under siege, and his only recourse was to build an impenetrable fortress around his existence. This marked the beginning of his final, extreme reclusion. He established an increasingly rigid set of rules for the few aides allowed into his inner circle. Every interaction, every object, every piece of food had to adhere to his meticulous and often bizarre protocols. Specific brands of soap and Kleenex became mandatory. Food had to be prepared and served in precise ways, untouched by human hands as much as possible. Communication was filtered. often through multiple intermediaries, to avoid direct contact. He demanded complete isolation, severing all but the most essential ties to the outside world. The man who once commanded vast empires, who had charmed Hollywood stars and challenged the limits of aviation, now commanded only his immediate sterile surroundings. His once trusted associates became mere conduits for his increasingly strange and demanding commands. Any meaningful connection was lost, replaced by a transactional relationship based on his rules and his paranoia. The vibrant, ambitious Howard Hughes was gone, replaced by a ghost in a darkened room, a prisoner of his own mind, his destiny sealed by a single, catastrophic plane crash and the drugs that followed. His self-imposed prison was complete. From within his self-imposed prison, Howard Hughes continued to exert astonishing control over his vast financial empire, an invisible empire, managed through a complex web of intermediaries. His wealth grew even as his body and mind deteriorated. He bought hotels, airlines, and real estate, all while remaining unseen, a phantom billionaire whose directives filtered down through layers of devoted, yet often exploited aides. These men became his only link to the outside world, fulfilling his increasingly bizarre demands, navigating his intense paranoia, and witnessing his slow, tragic decline firsthand. They were his hands, his eyes, his voice, operating on a schedule dictated by a man who often slept during the day and woke at night. The full extent of his physical and mental deterioration was stark. The once handsome, vigorous industrialist was now an emaciated figure, often weighing less than 100 pounds. His hair and beard were long and matted, his fingernails grown into grotesque talons. Personal hygiene became a forgotten concept. He was heavily reliant on laxatives and painkillers, particularly codeine, which had become his constant companion since the plane crash. His world shrank to the confines of darkened hotel suites, where he watched old movies repeatedly, his once sharp mind now consumed by obsessions and phobias. This was the complete manifestation of the consequence hinted at in the opening moments of his story. The man who feared the dust on his hands had become a prisoner of his own decay. The public, once fascinated by his daring exploits and Hollywood romances, now saw him as a caricature, a cautionary tale. The visionary who built empires was now a recluse, his legacy increasingly overshadowed by his profound madness. He was no longer the antagonist to external forces, but to himself. And his fall was the complete loss of his public image as a genius. He became a symbol of what unchecked wealth and isolation could do to a man, a testament to the fragility of even the most brilliant minds. Howard Hughes died on April 5, 1976, during a flight from Acapulco to Houston. He was 70 years old, but his appearance suggested a man far older and ravaged by disease. He was almost unrecognizable. The official cause of death was kidney failure, but the years of drug abuse, malnutrition, and profound neglect had taken their toll. His death marked the final, lamentable chapter of his life. The chaos didn't end with his passing. He died without a will, leading to an extensive and contentious legal battle over his vast, multi-billion-dollar estate. Countless individuals came forward claiming to be his heirs, including a gas station owner who produced a handwritten will found in his office. These legal battles, stretching on for years, only further highlighted the complete lack of control that characterized his final years. A bitter irony for a man who had spent his life trying to control every single detail. Howard Hughes's story is a profound and unsettling reflection on the intoxicating allure of power, the immense pressures of wealth, and the devastating cost of extreme isolation and unchecked mental illness. He was a man who sought ultimate control over everything he touched, from the skies above to the silver screens of Hollywood. Yet, in the end, he lost control over the one thing that mattered most, himself. His life serves as a poignant reminder of the fragility of the human mind, and the tragic question of what he might have achieved had his mind not turned so cruelly against him continues to linger, a silent echo in the annals of history.